There comes a moment in the quiet solitude of an ordinary day when the mind, usually so consumed by plans and obligations, pauses just long enough to notice the passing of time itself, where a strange, almost sacred realization can dawn upon us. That life in all its raw, untamed, and unpredictable beauty was never meant to be dissected, decoded, or solved like a puzzle, but rather embraced, lived, and felt with a courage that defies the safety of certainty. And it is precisely this ancient yet ever-forgotten wisdom that Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher often misunderstood and reduced to footnotes in the history of existentialism, dared to proclaim in a world that was already drifting into the illusion that reason alone could conquer the mystery of existence. Because if we look around us with eyes unclouded by routine, we may see that modern life itself has become an endless attempt to tame the wild, chaotic, and often painful reality of being human through explanations, theories, philosophies, doctrines, productivity systems, and self-help doctrines that promise happiness, meaning, and security in neatly packaged formulas. Yet paradoxically, the more we try to solve life, the more it slips through our fingers like sand, until what remains is not a life fully lived, but a carefully managed, endlessly analyzed existence drained of its spontaneity, passion, and immediacy. Kierkegaard, living in the first half of the 19th century, could already see what few dared to acknowledge: that this obsession with intellectual mastery over life, this refusal to dwell in uncertainty, this hunger for absolute answers, is not a sign of strength but a fear of the unknown, a fear of chaos, a fear confronting the dizzying freedom and terrifying responsibility that comes from truly living rather than merely existing as a spectator in one's own story. In his writings, Kierkegaard described human life as unfolding across three stages: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, not as mere abstract categories, but as living portraits of how we, as finite beings tormented by the longing for the infinite, try desperately to resolve the anguish born from this contradiction, and yet, in doing so, often miss the essence of life itself, turning away from the immediate, trembling heartbeat of existence to hide within comforting illusions. Consider the aesthetic stage, which so closely resembles a modern cult of distraction and entertainment, where life becomes an endless pursuit of novelty, pleasure, and stimulation, new experiences, new relationships, new achievements that momentarily mask the abyss of meaninglessness with excitement, only to reveal, in quieter moments, the haunting emptiness beneath the surface. Here, the individual flees from boredom and anguish, but the very flight ensures that these feelings return with even greater force, because pleasure, by its nature, is fleeting and cannot provide the rootedness that the human soul so desperately seeks. Then there is the ethical stage, which on the surface appears nobler and more stable. A life built on responsibility, moral duty, and social commitments. A life that seeks meaning through coherence, discipline, and service to values greater than the self. Yet even here, Kierkegaard warns of the subtle danger that duty and morality can become yet another system of control, another attempt to silence the ever-present anxiety that arises from our radical freedom. And in the process, we risk becoming prisoners of our own righteousness, measuring life by rules rather than by its lived, paradoxical truth. Finally, Kierkegaard points to the religious stage, not in the institutional sense alone, but as an existential posture, an inward leap beyond reason, where one confronts the absurdity and mystery of existence with faith, not as blind acceptance, but as a passionate embrace of life's contradictions. To live fully, not because one has found all the answers, but precisely because there are no final answers to be found. This, Kierkegaard tells us, is not the abandonment of thought, but the recognition that thought must serve life, not dominate it. That reason should guide us, but never claim the throne reserved for the immediate, unrepeatable, trembling reality of existence itself. For Kierkegaard, the tragedy of modern life is that, in trying so desperately to understand and control life, we risk losing ourselves in the process, becoming, as he so pointedly put it, spectators of our own lives, always analyzing, always planning, always waiting for the perfect moment to truly begin living, until at last it becomes too late. And this, perhaps, is the most painful realization, that the deepest danger is not dramatic failure, but quiet, unnoticed loss, the slow drifting away from one's own soul, while appearing outwardly successful, rational, and composed. It is in this insight that Kierkegaard remains painfully relevant today, In an age obsessed with self-improvement, optimization, and endless information, a world where it's easier than ever to spend life in front of screens, absorbing ideas, consuming content, perfecting plans, and yet never daring to step fully into the raw, unpredictable arena of real life with all its risks, contradictions, and unresolvable mysteries. Yet what would it mean to stop trying to solve life and start living it? What would it look like to abandon the chessboard, as Bergman's knight in the Seventh Seal could not? To let go of the illusion that, with enough strategy, we could outwit death or finally banish uncertainty. It would mean, first of all, acknowledging that life is not a problem to be solved, but reality to be lived. A living tapestry woven not from perfect answers, but from presence, choice, and the willingness to face uncertainty without retreat. It would mean accepting that anxiety, rather than a defect to be eliminated, is a sign of our freedom, a sign that we stand always on the threshold of becoming able to choose, able to act, able to live beyond what we can fully know or control. It would mean daring to feel deeply, to care passionately, to love without guarantees, to risk failure and heartbreak, to embrace our contradictions rather than fleeing them. Because it's only in the vulnerability of lived experience that life reveals its richest colors and deepest truths. It would mean seeing each ordinary moment, the smile of a loved one, the scent of rain on dry earth, the silent hour before dawn, not as distractions from some grander purpose, but as life itself, unfolding here and now, asking only that we be present. In Kierkegaard's view, the true enemy is not suffering, uncertainty, or even death itself, but despair. The quiet, hidden despair of living only on the surface, never daring to become who we truly are. And paradoxically, it is in facing anguish, in confronting anxiety without running from it, that we find the possibility of authentic life. Not a life free from pain, but a life deepened by it, made more precious by the very fact that it is fragile, uncertain, and finite. Kierkegaard challenges us to see that it is not our task to eliminate anxiety, but to learn from it. To see in it the call to freedom, the call to live not as spectators, but as protagonists in our own story. For it is only by choosing, again and again, in the face of uncertainty, that we become truly ourselves. To stop trying to solve life is not to stop thinking nor to abandon reflection, but to place thought in its rightful place, not as the master of life, but as its servant. It is to remember that no amount of analysis can replace the lived moment, and that the deepest truths are not concepts to be grasped, but realities to be lived, felt, and embodied. And if we ask, as so many have asked before us, but how do we live without certainty? How do we act without knowing for sure what is right or what the outcome will be? Kierkegaard's answer is both humbling and liberating. We live by faith. Not faith in dogmas or unexamined beliefs, but faith as an existential posture. The courage to step forward into the unknown, to choose without final guarantees, to act in love, hope, and commitment, even when doubt remains. Because life, in its deepest sense, is always a risk. To love is to risk heartbreak. To hope is to risk disappointment. To act is to risk failure. Yet to refuse these risks is to refuse life itself. To remain forever on the shore, never daring to step into the sea. To live, Kierkegaard tells us, is to embrace the paradox. To be finite beings who long for the infinite. To be temporal creatures who glimpse eternity. To be afraid and yet to act. To know we may fail and yet to try. It is this very paradox that makes life tragic, but also beautiful. Because it is only through our fragility, our incompleteness, that we can love, create, and find meaning. When we stop trying to solve life, we open ourselves to its gifts. The surprise of unexpected friendship, the quiet joy of morning sunrise, the profound beauty of forgiveness, the bittersweet ache of memory. We discover that the most important truths are not those we can prove, but those we live. Compassion, courage, integrity, love. And perhaps most importantly, we discover that our task is not to conquer life, but to participate in it. To give ourselves with all our flaws and doubts to the unfolding story of existence, trusting that it is in the living, not the solving, that we become fully human. In the end, Kierkegaard's message is both a challenge and an invitation. To let go of the illusion of control, to step beyond the safety of endless reflection, and to live truly, deeply, imperfectly, and passionately. Because life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And in the end, it is the living, not the knowing, that will have made it worth it. So let us dare as Kierkegaard dared, to step away from the chessboard, to stop playing against death, and instead turn to face life itself, to love without reserve, to hope without certainty, to act without waiting for perfect clarity. Let us dare to live. Not tomorrow, not when we finally have it all figured out, but now, in this imperfect, fleeting, miraculous moment. Because in the end, the greatest tragedy is not that life is uncertain, but that, in our fear of that uncertainty, we might forget to truly live it all.